On April 14, 2025, Argentina took a giant leap into the unknown, embarking on a journey that would reshape its economic landscape. President Javier Milei, a radical libertarian, dismantled the country's long-standing currency controls, known as el cepo, in a bold move that stunned many. These controls, a legacy of decades of economic turmoil, limited access to US dollars, creating a complex web of restrictions that stifled economic growth. Milei's decision marked a radical departure from previous policies, signaling a new era for Argentina. The move was met with a mix of anxiety and cautious optimism, as citizens grappled with the potential outcomes. Supporters hailed it as a necessary step to free the Argentine economy from government intervention, believing it would unleash the country's true potential. They argued it would attract foreign investment, boost exports, and lead to sustainable growth, creating a more prosperous future for all. Critics, however, warned of dire consequences: sharp devaluation of the peso, soaring inflation, and social unrest, fearing the move could backfire. The immediate impact was undeniable as the nation braced for the fallout. The peso, artificially propped up for years, plummeted in value against the US dollar, sending shockwaves through the economy. Inflation, already a persistent problem, threatened to spiral out of control, affecting everyday life for millions. The question on everyone's mind was whether Milei's gamble would pay off in the long run, or if it would plunge the country into deeper economic woes. The most immediate consequence of lifting the currency controls was a sharp depreciation of the Argentine peso. The peso, previously confined to a narrow trading band, was suddenly exposed to market forces. The result was predictable. The peso went into freefall, losing over 11% of its value against the US dollar on the first day. The black market, which had long flourished, offered a glimpse into the true value of the peso. Businesses that relied on imported goods saw their costs skyrocket overnight. Consumers, already grappling with high inflation, faced even higher prices for basic necessities. The devaluation also had significant implications for Argentina's external debt, much of which was denominated in US dollars. The Milei administration insisted that the depreciation was a necessary correction. They argued it would make Argentine exports more competitive and attract foreign investment. However, many economists warned that the devaluation could fuel inflation and erode purchasing power. As the Argentine peso went into a tailspin, losing value at an alarming rate, all eyes turned to the International Monetary Fund, or IMF, as the potential savior of the nation's economy. The IMF, no stranger to Argentina's economic woes, had a history of stepping in during times of crisis. They had been in negotiations with the Milei government for months, trying to hammer out a deal that would provide relief. Just days before the lifting of currency controls, a critical moment for the economy, the IMF approved a $20 billion loan package, a significant sum aimed at stabilizing the situation. The first tranche of $12 billion was disbursed immediately, providing much-needed support to Argentina's dwindling foreign currency reserves. This injection of funds was crucial, but it came with significant conditions. The IMF loan, however, came with strings attached: strict fiscal discipline, including deep cuts to government spending and structural reforms. These reforms were aimed at stabilizing the economy in the long run, but they were likely to cause short-term pain for the population. These conditions, while necessary to stabilize the economy in the long run, were likely to cause short-term pain. The public braced for austerity measures, knowing that the road to recovery would be challenging. The World Bank and the Inter-American Development Bank also pledged billions of dollars in loans, adding to the financial lifeline. The United States, while supportive of Milei's reform efforts, stopped short of providing a direct credit line, opting instead for diplomatic support. This left Argentina to rely heavily on the IMF and other international institutions for financial support. The question remained whether these financial lifelines would be enough to prevent a full-blown economic crisis, or if more drastic measures would be needed in the future. One of the most immediate risks associated with lifting currency controls was the prospect of massive capital flight. With the peso in freefall, there were fears that individuals and businesses would rush to convert their pesos into US dollars. Argentina, with its history of economic instability and currency crises, was particularly vulnerable to capital flight. Previous episodes had crippled the economy, leading to bank runs, shortages, and social unrest. The Milei administration imposed limits on foreign currency purchases and tightened restrictions on money transfers abroad. However, these measures were unlikely to completely stem the tide if investors lost confidence in the government's ability to stabilize the economy. The lifting of currency controls was just one piece of a much larger economic reform program by President Javier Milei. This bold move was intended to stabilize the Argentine peso and attract foreign investment, but it was just the beginning. Since taking office in December 2023, Milei had embarked on a radical mission to remake the Argentine economy. His vision was clear: to transform Argentina into a free market powerhouse. His approach, often described as shock therapy, was based on free markets, limited government intervention, and fiscal austerity. This meant making tough decisions that would have immediate and far-reaching impacts. One of Milei's first moves was to slash government spending. This included cutting down on bureaucratic inefficiencies and reducing the size of the public sector workforce. He eliminated subsidies on utilities and public transportation, which had long been a financial burden on the state. Reduced the number of state employees, leading to significant layoffs and restructuring within government departments, and drastically cut back on social programs. These cuts affected many low-income families who relied on government assistance. These austerity measures, while necessary to rein in budget deficits, were deeply unpopular. Public outcry and protests became a common sight. Milei also moved to dismantle price controls, which had been in place for years to keep essential goods affordable, arguing they distorted the market and created shortages. The immediate effect was a visible scarcity of products on store shelves. The removal of price controls led to a surge in prices, further fueling inflation. This made everyday life more expensive for ordinary Argentinians. Milei announced plans to privatize several state-owned enterprises, aiming to reduce government debt and improve operational efficiency. Arguing it would improve efficiency and attract foreign investment. He believed that private ownership would lead to better management and innovation. Opponents accused him of selling off national assets to the highest bidder. They feared that privatization would lead to job losses and reduced public services. The radical economic reforms implemented by President Javier Milei did not take place in a vacuum. They unfolded against a backdrop of deep political divisions and growing social unrest. Milei, a political outsider, had come to power in a wave of popular discontent with the previous government. His libertarian ideas resonated with voters frustrated by years of economic stagnation, high inflation, and corruption. However, Milei's radical reforms alienated large segments of the population. Labor unions were vehemently opposed to his austerity measures and pro-business policies. A series of general strikes brought the country to a standstill. Protests erupted in Buenos Aires and other major cities as Argentines voiced their anger and frustration. The political climate was further inflamed by the upcoming midterm elections, with Milei's approval ratings beginning to decline. As Argentina embarked on this uncertain economic path, the ghosts of past defaults loomed large. Argentina had a long and troubled history with debt, defaulting on its sovereign debt 8 times since gaining independence. The 2001 default, the largest in history at the time, had plunged Argentina into an economic abyss. Argentina's history of defaults had made it a pariah in international capital markets. Milei's decision to lift currency controls and implement market-oriented reforms was seen by some as an attempt to restore Argentina's credibility. However, the country still faced an uphill battle, remaining the IMF's largest debtor, owing over $43 billion. The success of Milei's economic reforms would depend on convincing investors that Argentina was finally turning the corner. The decision to lift currency controls was a risky gamble, even for a president known for his unconventional approach to economics. It was a bet that the short-term pain of a weaker peso and higher inflation would be outweighed by the long-term gains of a more open and competitive economy. Milei's long-term goal was to create a free market paradise in Argentina, a beacon of libertarianism in a region often associated with state interventionism. He envisioned an Argentina fully integrated into the global economy, attracting foreign investment and enjoying sustainable growth. To achieve this vision, Milei knew he had to break with Argentina's past. He had to convince the world that Argentina was no longer the same country that had defaulted on its debts time and time again. Whether he would succeed remained to be seen. The odds were stacked against him, but Milei was determined to prove his critics wrong. The lifting of currency controls in Argentina marked the end of an era. These controls, known as el cepo, had been a fixture of Argentine economic life for decades. They were a legacy of the country's turbulent past, marked by hyperinflation, currency crises, and economic mismanagement. The controls were first introduced in 2019 to stem capital flight and stabilize the plummeting peso. While the controls provided some short-term stability, they also created a black market for currency exchange and stifled economic growth. The lifting of el cepo was a gamble, but one that Milei believed was necessary to break Argentina free from its cycle of economic booms and busts.